Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Just a fair word of warning, this will be our last show of the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a Thanksgiving hiatus. I wish you a happy Thanksgiving to you and yours in advance, but we should have a great show to get you prepared for this holiday weekend, starting off by previewing all three of the, shall we say, bizarre Thanksgiving games. A couple of those I think are going to be more exciting than others. Then I'm going to be previewing the rivalry week of college football. Always a fantastic week, but now with a lot more playoff seeding, CFP implications, conference championship game implications, and what have you. Then I'm going to be making my picks for some of the other games during this holiday weekend, concluding my positional rankings with the tight ends this time around. I wanted to save my best weekly Shadow Report segment for last instead of, continuing on with my defense and special teams rankings. And as always, to conclude, I will do, like I just said, my weekly Shadow Report. But before we get into any of that exciting stuff, if you want to follow along with the show, subscribe to the network. As Tap to Learn also says thank you, same to you and yours, even though he is my father. He can't hide for that long. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And so, before we get into any of all of our talk here today, I do want to remind you, as I was getting into, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you want more content such as this. But if you want to contribute, like Tap to Learn has done already, more directly to the show, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. A great way to contribute and interact with the show. You can do it on our website as well, gsmcpodcast.net, if you are not necessarily familiar perhaps with YouTube settings or what have you. But either way, it is greatly appreciated from all those concerned with the shows we do here at the network and the network itself. It just makes the show that much better as well, and we thank you for it in advance. But without further ado, let us jump into our first segment of the day, starting off here with this very interesting slate of tomorrow in terms of NFL games on Thanksgiving Day. We have very mixed reactions to some of these games throughout the public eye, but nevertheless, it's Thanksgiving. It should be a fun affair no matter where you are in the world, and it's just something that reminds us, no matter how bad the football might be, of the holiday itself and what we are thankful for. So without further ado, just going to do a quick rundown, a little bit of a snapshot of each of these games, because we have three instead of one and it's a lot to go over. But each of them deserves in their own right a certain little storyline to them. Starting off with the earliest game here in the slate, the Bears-Lions, the one that feels the most traditional, as the Lions feel like the Thanksgiving team. They play the most times, I believe, out of any team on the holiday. They are 10.5-point favorites at home, but in recent years, they haven't necessarily been good at home on the holiday, and so this one could be an opportunity for the Bears to steal a victory here, even though it's looking less and less likely, because the Lions are the best team in the NFL, and the Bears continue to shoot themselves in the foot more often than not. Had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago against Washington. All they had to do to get to 5-2 was defend a Hail Mary, and they failed at that, and now they sit at 4-7, having lost their last 5. And the Lions roll in looking like the best team in the NFL, although they didn't necessarily look like a well-oiled machine against Indy, even though that's a tough team to play at this time of year. But I still think Detroit's going to get it done. The over-under is 48.5. I think that Detroit could hit the over there if they stockpile points, even though I have to give credit to what Chicago's defense has done this year. Very well-rounded on the defensive side of the football. But overall, Detroit should do enough to carry this one out. Even though, the home record's a little bit shaky, and anything can happen on a holiday, I feel like this is a team that is going to have Super Bowl aspirations. They feel like they are going to be the last team standing at the end of the year, as Tap to Learn agrees with the sentiment by saying lions roar, bears hibernate early. And I feel like that pretty much sums up some people's view of this game, because a lot of people feel like the Lions will dominate, but I want to give the Bears a little bit of benefit of the doubt. I do think that they'll have the ability to cover, but in potentially a very weird way where they're playing catch up more so than keeping it close, because that's where, I feel like the Bears will try and chip away at the Lions there at the end. But overall, this should be a comprehensive Lions victory. Then for potentially the snooze fest out of the 3 games, Tommy DeVito versus Cooper Rush. It's Giants versus Cowboys. And we have to talk about this game, unfortunately. But if you are a Giants or Cowboys fan, no threats for you here, because I actually think this could be a weirdly entertaining game. Maybe not for the many reasons other people think it will be a bad game, but I do think that in some ways these two messy teams will combine to create something that amounts to a fun spectacle on the football field. Let's just put it that way. Dallas are somehow 3.5-point favorites, as Tap to Learn says Bears need turnovers and flukes of that last game, and I agree with that as well. The Bears need all they can get in that one, and if they get it, the potential of this game is closer than we might think. But I do think that towards the end of the game, the Lions might take their foot off the gas, and so that's where I think the closeness and separation between these two teams won't look that necessarily, surprising on paper. But moving on to the Giants-Cowboys game, I think, Dallas is the deserved favorite. I'm not entirely sure, because the Giants are, no matter how messy, still a team that has talent within it. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to who makes less mistakes. And not for nothing, Cooper Rush is coming off perhaps his best game as a Dallas Cowboy. Even in that 6-game stint he had a couple of years ago when Dak went down, this was perhaps his best game out of that entire bunch. And so that's why I feel like right now the Cowboys are still a team that believes that they can pull out games like this. They're not going to compete against the NFC or AFC's elite anytime soon. But this should be a game they should feel they should win. Well, that's the Giants side of things. It's more so damage control. It's not necessarily going to be a pretty product that you're putting out on the field, but you're trying to limit the damage. You're trying to play for pride in some games. Maybe you are tanking for a guy like Shedeur Sanders or a guy like Cam Ward, but at least this is going to be about going out there on Thanksgiving and putting a decent at best product out there on the field for your fans to appreciate. Needless to say, though, a lot of casual, neutral NFL fans, so to speak, probably might be sleeping through this one, because it's definitely not the most entertaining of games. That being said, I gotta go with the Cowboys here, just because they feel like the better team in this matchup, but it could honestly go either way, just because both of these teams right now are in pretty terrible situations. And then last but not least, the game that I feel has the most chance out of all of these games to be the best of the day, the concluding one of the day, Dolphins-Packers. Green Bay a 3-point favorite, although we're going to see in latter segments here, I do think the Dolphins are an interesting opponent here. The Dolphins have a lot of momentum. They feel they're right in the thick of the AFC playoff picture, gunning for that wild card spot. And they're amongst teams, most importantly, that haven't necessarily been in this position before. This is the first time the Broncos have been relevant. And it's the first time, the Colts with Anthony Richardson are in this position as well. So the pressure's more on them. Whereas the Dolphins know what they need to do. They have one of the easier schedules out of all of those AFC playoff hopefuls. And this is the only really test, as Almighty Finesse enters the chat, is the only real test that I feel the Dolphins will have to pass. And I think they do. I think this is a very, very winnable game for this Dolphins team with the way they've been playing. I look at all the weapons they have. You see Tyreek Hill, he's still a number one option. As Almighty Finesse said, DJ Moore went off last week and told me to start Juwan. I did not predict DJ Moore to play as well as he did, but sometimes I'm wrong here on the show, and I'll roll with the punches here. But it was up to me. I felt like that was the better matchup. But overall, I hope it all was well in your fantasy week. And I also want to address a comment from Tap to Learn as well about the Giants-Cowboys game. The winner loses in the draft race at the bottom. Dable's hot seat is getting hotter and hotter. I agree with that as well. I feel like, this is it for Brian Dable. This might be his last stand, and so he has to go out with a bang. But going back to this Dolphins-Packers game here, I feel like the Dolphins have an offense capable of overwhelming this Packers defense. I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving all these offenses the benefit of the doubt when going up against the Packers, because I really don't think that Packers defense is as good as people think. I think that they predicate themselves on taking the ball away, and that's a risky approach. And eventually, a team like the Dolphins, where you have so many different weapons to utilize, both in the ground game and through the air, you're going to get got. And I feel like this is the potential kind of trap game the Packers don't want. On Thanksgiving, the last game of the day, and the Dolphins are coming in red hot, playing with a lot of fire now that Tua's back, and really looking to go on that playoff run. And so that's why I feel like this is the kind of game where the Packers might slip up. They're honestly not necessarily looking that good right now, and thus far I feel like the Packers are one of the NFC contenders, quote unquote, that feel the most vulnerable right now. They feel like they're a team that's playing with fire a little bit too much, and eventually when you play with fire you get burned. And so that's why I feel like the Dolphins are a team right now coming in hot that can really overwhelm this Packers defense, unlike any offense that has tried thus far this season. But let me know what you think in the comments about all three of these games. Very intriguing games, no matter how good or bad they look on paper. But coming up after this short break, we transition over to the world of college football. Rivalry week. A lot of implications to go over and a lot of games that could tell us a lot about different teams. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you wish to interact with the show more directly while we're live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. It's greatly appreciated by all the shows around the network and the network itself, and I greatly appreciate it as well. Just makes the show that much better and more exciting. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today's show, transitioning a little bit more into the college football world. The last week of the regular season college football, more commonly known as Rivalry Week, even though the rivalry aspect is more and more lessened in terms of CFP importance, because the CFP importance, no matter who you're playing, is very high stakes right now. And all 4 of these games, yes, you can call them rivalries, but they're more than that this season, as people and teams are jockeying to get a place in a 12-team playoff. And all of these games could determine how far teams fall, if they remain in the race, what they have to do in their conference championships, if they even get there. So there's a lot at stake. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off with actually one of the more weird games of the weekend, because it's a group of 5 game that seemingly is not as important as one might think, because the winner of this game or the loser is going to need a lot of help to still get into the CFP race. But it's still one that is between 2 very high-octane offenses in the AAC. It's Memphis going up against number 17 Tulane, trying to spoil their slim CFP hopes. Now, the thing about Tulane is that they have a chance, and they have actually looked like, down the stretch, the best team in the group of 5. They're playing the most clean football right now, but they have a Boise State-sized problem impeding their path, because Boise State, as long as they win out, are the most likely group of 5 recipient of a CFP spot, and maybe even a first-round bye, considering the chaos of the Big 12, which we'll get into. But here's the thing. Memphis is one of the more experienced offenses in the nation, and I don't necessarily think Tulane has come up against a team like them thus far. The losses that Tulane have are decent losses. They're to Kansas State and Oklahoma, but you have to win convincingly against fellow group of 5 opponents who have similar records to you. Memphis, in fact, a same 9-2 record as Tulane, but you have to win convincingly as well. And I don't necessarily know if Tulane has that in the repertoire, because Memphis, like I said, is one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country in Seth Hennigan, a electrifying receiver in Mario Anderson, who I believe was a former Oklahoma Sooner, and a lot of talent and depth in this squad. Whereas Tulane, yes, they're a very exciting offense. They can put up points in bunches, but this is a situation that I don't think a lot of people would have expected them to be in, right? With a really sneaky chance to sneak into that final spot in the playoffs, potentially be a team with a first-round bye. And so this game puts a lot of pressure on Tulane. Win, though, and that's the first step to wishing and hoping, right? If you win, you're still in this thing. You just have to hope that Boise State falters somewhere along the line. But if you lose, then it's meaningless. However, I have to consider that both of these teams are going to bring their A games, because slim chances are better than no chance at all. And I have to acknowledge that in this one. Tulane are 14, actually the line lowered to 13.5, but I'm going to take them to cover in this one and win outright, just because they look like the best team in the group of 5 at this current moment in time. Now let's get into the big one. The one with all the marbles at stake. To the victor goes the spoils. A trip in the SEC championship game. For one team, it would be a historic first, potentially, as they could be the first team ever in the SEC. Not since Alabama in the inaugural season of the SEC, as a first-time member of the conference, gone in and won it in their first year. And on the other side of things, you have a team that potentially could sneak into the playoffs, be a bid stealer, should they win this game in the SEC championship game. It's Texas A&M. And funnily enough, in a week called Rivalry Week, this rivalry hasn't been played since 2011. Not since both were in the Southwest Conference with this rivalry played, and we all know how that ended. A little-known kicker named Justin Tucker, don't know if you've heard about him at all even, won the game at Kyle Field with his last-second kick. But now, history is at stake here yet again, because I feel like, if Texas loses this game, as much as I'd like to say they're in, their resume and the eye test is not in their favor thus far. Their best win is probably against now 6-5 Oklahoma, just because of that win against Alabama. Might be against Vanderbilt, but not necessarily the best of SEC wins. But it's not necessarily their fault that in their first season the SEC kind of rolled out the red carpet for them. They played and won against whoever in front of them. They have one of the quote-unquote better losses in the country to Georgia, but it's still a schedule that gives me pause, right? And on the Texas A&M side of things, they haven't necessarily looked very convincing. They got blown out by South Carolina on the road and had a puzzling loss to Auburn last week, but they're still a team that's capable of knocking off a team like Texas on a bad day for them. And so the keys to the game are very simple for both sides. If you're Texas, you're taking advantage of the one weakness in the Texas A&M defense you can exploit, and that's the corners. But it's about how many deep shots you're comfortable with Quinn Ewers making, because Quinn Ewers might be hobbled in this game, and I'm not necessarily certain that Sark will want him throwing the football downfield as often. I think you can win the horizontal route by stretching them along the line, getting the receivers out in space like Bond, like Bolden, and using their speed to win. But I think taking deep shots is the quickest way to put up points and the quickest way to force Texas A&M out of their comfort zone and try and play catch up with you. And if you're Texas A&M, you win through your defense. Your front is one of the best ones in the SEC. You have to hope you win up front because Texas's offensive line, yes, they've had their moments of ineffectiveness, but for the most part, they remain one of the best offensive line units in the nation. It's going to be tough, but I think that's the best way to win this game, because if you pressure Quinn Ewers, chances are you can force a couple turnovers, chances are you can win the field position battle, most importantly, and allow Marcel Reed and his legs to make big plays on the offensive side of the football, even though you're going up against a very good defensive unit. So it's all about Texas doing what you do best, exploiting cornerbacks, no matter which way you throw the football, vertically or horizontally. If you're Texas A&M, follow the Georgia game plan. Win the field position battle, most importantly, by forcing turnovers, and try and generate as much pressure on Quinn Ewers as possible. And on the offensive side of the football, let Marcel Reed be Marcel Reed, because he's capable of winning this football game all on his own. He's a fantastic football player, and he has the home field advantage behind him, so this could be a game where Texas A&M gets buoyed by that home crowd environment, because nobody wants to go into Kyle Field this late in the season and face a Texas A&M team there. They're a fantastic home team, might I add. So it's going to be a good one to conclude the SEC year and determine the participant going up to face Georgia in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. And now you have to talk about the game itself, even though it's a little bit more underwhelming than years past. Michigan, Ohio State. Oh, I forgot to pick my Texas A&M winner. Texas is now the 5.5-point favorite. The line moved down in their favor. I'm going to take Texas on the road. It's a risky bit of a pick here, but I have to think that Quinn Ewers is going to have one or two big explosive plays in the field that will be the difference in this one. So I'm taking Texas on the road in a hostile environment to pull it out and perhaps cement their place in the CFP picture. But Michigan, Ohio State is not necessarily the trap game a lot of people would think. I think, Ohio State are deservedly 21-point favorites. And even though, they haven't beaten Michigan in the past 3 or so years, they have the best chance because they're the more complete team. They finally have a competent quarterback. Well, not necessarily a competent quarterback more so than others they've had, but a quarterback who understands the structure of this team. He understands he doesn't have to play hero ball sometimes, and that was probably one of the things that prevented Ohio State from winning in recent years against Michigan. Whereas Michigan, their big struggle is they only have two or three major weapons on the offensive side of the football, and even though their defense is still pretty elite, their offense is not capable of either A, distributing the ball with these weapons, or B, putting up enough points so that the defense is not in the field repeatedly. And thus, that's why I feel like it's going to be a tough ride for this Michigan team. I feel like Ohio State can punish you in so many different ways, even if you're an elite defense, through either the ground game or through the air. So it's going to be tough sledding. That being said, there could be a way where Michigan keeps this closer. It could be a rock fight in certain sense, and it might just happen that Ohio State's going to pull away late and make this game not look as close as it could be. But I feel like Ohio State is just the team that is now so well equipped to beat Michigan that it would be silly for me not to pick them now. And I know it's a large spread, and I know that I said I'm a little bit apprehensive to pick them in this situation, but I think they'll do just enough. So I'm going to take Ohio State with the points here to win this game and cover this lofty spread. And the last game that I want to talk about here really briefly, how about Arizona State, Arizona? Now, one would think that Arizona would be the playoff hopeful playing for their playoff lives, but it's Arizona State who has the upper hand here. If they win, they are a conference championship participant in the Big 12. Look at Arizona State, man. Who would have thought it? They're 9.5. They're 9-point favorites now, although I think I saw the line didn't move. Let me check. Yes, to 8.5. So Vegas still kind of respecting Arizona here, and they are a good team. They have the best receiver in the nation in Ted McMillan, but right now Arizona State just has all the momentum in the world. You have one of the best running backs in the nation, Cam Scatabo. Sam Levitt's been playing incredible ball, and Kenny Dillingham has been coaching this team fantastically throughout the season. So I feel like ASU is playing with house money. It could get hectic and chaotic in the Big 12, but they control their own destiny. And all you have to do is beat your in-state rival, and you're in. I know it sounds a little bit more difficult when I put it that way, but I think ASU has just been playing the better football. I think Arizona has just been too volatile. They've let noise overwhelm them throughout the season and before the season even, and it kind of caught up to them. And ASU was just playing freely because nobody had expectations for them in the first place. So look for ASU to win this game. Maybe not cover the spread, but to win this contest. I'm taking Arizona to cover, but not to win. Let me know what you think about these games in the comments below. But coming up next, we transition back into the NFL, where I make my picks in some of the biggest games of the weekend outside of Thanksgiving and otherwise. I'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. And for today's third segment, I'm going to be talking a little bit more extensively about some of the other games on the weekend slate outside of Thanksgiving and Black Friday, our first ever Black Friday game. But I am starting off by picking one of these Thanksgiving games, but I wanted to pick 4 games that really stood out to me as the cream of the crop. Because week in, week out, I always try to find an underrated contest. But now that, we're starting to get more exciting matchups that decide a lot more in terms of playoff pictures and seeding, now is the time more than ever where I'm going to be picking more exciting games that mean more to certain fan bases, and most importantly, to big bettors out there. So without further ado, let's jump right into my picks for Week 13. Starting off, like I said, with one of the Thanksgiving games, in fact, the most exciting one, like I said during that segment of the day, and it is Dolphins-Packers. This game, I feel like, could be a trap game for the Packers. They're still going to bring their A game. They're still an offense I respect very much, and still a defense that is one of the most opportunistic in all of football. But the Dolphins are rolling in here on a high. Tua's back. He's playing as well as he ever has. And this offense is finding new weapons. Not just, going to the usual guys in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Although Jalen Waddle had a big game last week. Jonnu Smith is getting incorporated in this offense. Devon Achane looks himself again. You're getting different weapons rolling and being more utilized in this offense. And they look very dangerous. So, even though the Packers are 3-point favorites here, I think that I have to pick the Dolphins in this one. They just feel like one of the more well-equipped units to really break down this Packers defense. I'm telling you, I'm waiting for the moment where a defense finally solves the puzzle of the Packers defense, because I don't necessarily think, like I always say, that this Packers defense is as vaunted and fearsome as people say it is. I don't necessarily like their front seven. Yes, their cornerbacks are elite. Yes, they generate takeaways. Yes, Xavier McKinney looks like a Pro Bowler, and he probably will be. But this unit hasn't faced an offense that I believe can completely dissect it at every single level in all three phases of the game. So that's why I feel like the Dolphins, who are playing very hot, playing very, very good football right now, can go in there and upset the Packers in the last game of Thanksgiving in a thriller there. Taking the Dolphins outright, so against the spread, I think it's going to be a close one though. I'm going to go Dolphins 30, Packers 27. And I think it's going to be a last-minute touchdown from Tua to Jonnu Smith, who's been on a heater these past couple of weeks. It's Little Fettuccine does have a comment here about my favorite personal team, the Seattle Seahawks. Are they getting into the playoffs? I think they control their own destiny, yes. They have one of the tougher remaining schedules out of any NFC West team. They have to still play the Packers on the road, I believe, and the Vikings at home. They play the Cardinals again on the road. And they have to, continue relying on this defense, because I feel this offense is more about opportunism than anything else. I feel like it's not necessarily an offense that's going to put up as many points as you think, even though I feel like they can score on anybody. But it's going to come down to the play of the defense. Can Mike McDonald's defense maintain this consistency they found over these past 3 games and really test it out against these elite offenses and teams in the NFC? And if they solve that question by making statements against these teams, then yes, they're a playoff team. But with the logjam of the NFC West and the fact that their offense really hasn't necessarily proved that they can consistently put up points week in, week out, I'm not too certain about that. That being said, they still look like one of those teams that could sneak in and potentially be a sneaky first-round team that no one wants to face at home. So, either way, they're going to have a large say in who comes out of the NFC West, whether themselves or, say, Arizona or LA. That's all I have to say about that. But then for our second game of the day, speaking of the Arizona Cardinals here, Cardinals-Vikings. This is an interesting game because I feel like this is either going to be a shootout, because I like both of these quarterbacks in this game, or a defensive slugfest, because I respect both of these defenses. And even though people were saying, well, the Cardinals defense looked a little bit sluggish against Seattle, they still limited the Seattle offense to 16 points. Yes, if you take away the run game from Seattle, chances are you take away a lot of that offense. But it was still an impressive performance nonetheless from them. But this is a more daunting task for both of these teams. For the Vikings, I feel like it's going to be about the efficiency of Sam Darnold, as it always is. When is he going to really slip through the cracks here and finally look a little bit more mortal than usual? And then for the Cardinals, it's more about, can Kyler Murray perform within structure and out of it against a defense that's going to predicate itself on getting as much pressure as possible on him and containing the run. And they've been excellent at doing that so far. I think James Conner is going to be a huge X factor in this game if they can get him going, because if they can really get physical up front with Minnesota and win in the trenches, then Arizona has a good shot of scoring and putting up points enough to really challenge this Vikings team. But I think that the Vikings right now really pride themselves on winning with aggression and defense, and on the offensive side of the football, just playing the time of possession game, retaining the football, playing efficiently, turnover-free football, hopefully, for them in this one. And that's why, as 3.5-point favorites, I'm taking them to win this one outright. I just feel like right now, Arizona is playing in a mirage, right? They can't necessarily figure out what they want to be. They got punked by Seattle after the bye, and now they're playing a very tough physical game against the Vikings. So chances are this team is going to slip a little bit. I still think they're firmly in the NFC West race, even if they lose this game. But I feel like this is a game that's going to get the best of them yet again, just because of the fact in back-to-back weeks you're playing two very physical, pressure-heavy defenses. So that's why I gotta respect the Vikings in this one. Even though, the Vikings offense could find it a little more challenging to put up points against the Cardinals defense. So that's why I feel like this game could go either way. With that being said, I'm going to take the Vikings here. I think it's going to be a 20-13 game, pretty low scoring affair, but ultimately the Vikings doing just enough on the offensive side of the football to pull this one out. And then the next game that I want to talk about is perhaps a Super Bowl preview, maybe. Definitely not the two best teams in their conference, but two teams I could definitely see making it to the Super Bowl when all is said and done. The Eagles and the Ravens. I really like this game a lot because both of these teams match up so well. A lot of similarities in terms of the QB running back duo, the diversity of the receiving core. Although, on the defensive side of the football for Baltimore, not necessarily the pass defense that it once was last year, and the Eagles as well, a defense that has been fantastic against the pass and the run, but has been pretty banged up in recent weeks, all together making for a very fun intra-conference matchup here. But I do think that when I compare these two teams and compare their play styles, I certainly feel like Phillies is a little bit more well-rounded, right? Because even though I think that Lamar is the better quarterback and can really win the game in so many different ways and is so versatile in how he can win, I feel like right now Jalen Hurts is also becoming a lot more free, much like what Lamar Jackson became over these past couple of years, and the reason why he's an MVP candidate. Because of the fact, that the acquisition of Saquon alleviates some of the burden as well. And that's why I feel like in this game, Baltimore, again, is a favorite in this one. 3-point favorite. I have to pick the underdog here. I really like how the Eagles are playing right now. And I do feel that even though it was a very impressive performance by the Ravens against the Chargers didn't have J.K. Dobbins that second half. And that was a big loss for them. And it really forced their hand in what they did in that second half. Whereas Saquon, ironically, someone who's been chastised and kind of vilified for being injured for as often as he has for these past couple of years, has had a full bill of health throughout this season and looking like someone who could compete for that MVP against Lamar come, that time. But overall, I just think right now the Eagles are playing better football. It's that plain and simple to me. I feel like, when I look at the hierarchy of teams right now, it's the Lions and Eagles in the NFC. And when you combine both of them and compare them to the AFC field feels a little bit weaker because it's the Bills and the Chiefs who both have shown a little bit more vulnerabilities than both the Lions and the Eagles. And then I think about the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Chargers and teams of that nature. So there's not really that much depth in the AFC, surprisingly, as there is in the NFC, because everyone's beating up on each other there. So I have to take the Eagles, the more physical team, and I just feel like Saquon is a big difference in this Philly offense, and he's going to prove it against the Ravens in this intra-conference matchup that could be an amuse-bouche for a fascinating Super Bowl. But then the final game that I want to talk about here is a bizarre one as well. The 49ers going against the Bills, looking like a pretty terrible game weather-wise, because there's been warnings of severe weather coming to Buffalo in that one. But I do feel like, a lot of attention is going to fall on the 49ers and how they decide whether or not Brock Purdy's going to play in this one. He could be a game-kind decision. They could decide to keep him out for yet another week a little bit earlier than expected. But I do feel like this shoulder injury is going to linger for a while longer, even after, he comes back, if he comes back at all this season. And so that just makes me feel more and more like the Bills are going to win this one, because the Bills love this climate. The 49ers flying across the country, kind of hanging their heads a little bit. They lost ground in the NFC West 2 weeks ago by losing in a heartbreaking fashion to Seattle, getting punked without Purdy and Bosa against Green Bay at home, and now they have to fly all the way across the country to play in a blizzard against Buffalo and Josh Allen, who are really rolling right now and look like the best team in the AFC. And so when all of that adds up, you get a matchup that's really going to be a mountain to climb for the 49ers here. So I have to pick the Bills, 6.5-point favorites. Could be even higher when all is said and done, should Purdy not play. But I do think that if Purdy does play, I feel like the offense can do enough to make this interesting. I actually don't necessarily think that if Purdy does play, the offense is going to put up as many points as, say, it would if Brandon Allen were to play, but at least it gives you this optimism of a close game, right? Whereas that 49ers is going to be a lamb up for slaughter if Brandon Allen's out there. So that's the only thing that I see really making a difference. But let me know what you think in the comments about these games, because all four of them I feel like are the four best games of the weekend. But coming up next, we conclude our positional rankings on today's show with our tight end position. A little bit unusual, as I want to get to my weekly shadow report instead of our defensive rankings, but should be an interesting deep dive into a very volatile position, so you definitely don't want to miss it right after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of today's show, a little bit of an unusual when we're concluding our positional rankings this week with the tight ends rather than the defenses, as we are having a short week here on the show on the network. But I would have it no other way, because I love talking about the tight end position. Like I said, one of my favorite positions just because of its volatility and just because of the depth and experience we have in this position. I was talking about before the season how we're finally going to see a little bit of a split between a younger generation and an older generation, where it's the Kittles and Kelce's versus the Porters and Kincaids of the world. We haven't necessarily seen. What we've seen is an amalgamation of different talents, either unsung heroes or established veterans, really stand out this year. And it's made for an exciting analysis each and every week of the tight end position as I try and decipher who to choose for my rankings. But all four of these guys, potentially 3 out of the 4 guys you would never have thought would end up on my list in terms of who I think could be viable starts in certain matchups. But that's the depth of the position, like I say, and it just makes it that much more exciting. If you are skeptical, let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your guys' opinions about these positional rings. Without further ado, let's just jump right into them. Starting off, as always, No, not always, because this guy wasn't expected to be here. With a guy who I feel like needs to become much more of a focal point for this team down the stretch, because they really need someone who can get physical in the pass game. Someone who kind of simplifies things a little bit more for the pass game as well, most importantly, because right now I feel like they're in a weird place, a rocky place, and there's a need to expand a little further, and this guy can really calm it down. So look for Dalton Schultz to get going against the Jaguars in a nicely contested AFC South battle, because the Jaguars, it seems like they're playing out the string of the season here, but they're still going to try and play with as much pride. This could be their Super Bowl, much like the Browns' snow game was against the Steelers 2 weeks ago. But Dalton Schultz is a very unusual case study as a tight end, at the tight end position, because he plays for a team that really doesn't predicate itself on needing him that much. But in situations such as these, right, where you're trying to force your hand a little bit if you're the Texans on the offensive side of the football, you need a guy like Dalton Schultz to really calm everything down. He only had 4 fantasy points against Tennessee when he could have had much more, what turned out to be a trap game for the Texans. And this one, if they want to win this one, which is, again, it's a trap game in the AFC South, you're going to need to win with physicality. Because remember, last time these two teams played, the Texans actually needed a walk-off touchdown to win. And if you don't want that to happen again, and you want a comfortable win, as you should imagine they want, against a team that they should beat handily 9 times out of 10, you just need to bring the physicality. And they just have it week in, week out. And that's what's led to now. And so that's why I think Dalton Schultz's importance is going to shine through for this Texans team, whether he does perform or not. And so I think that's the perfect way to get him going against a divisional opponent that you can beat by a lot against the Jaguars here, to really kind of jumpstart this kick into the playoffs. Because should you get there, you want to acquit yourselves nicely again, much like you did last year. So look for Dalton Schultz to be a big part of the Texans' plans down the stretch. And the second guy, another really unexpected guy, a guy I'm all too familiar with for his time at Seattle, now plying his trade in LA, could be a very interesting guy to monitor down the stretch here. My man, Will Dissly, going up against the Falcons' pass defense, as we always say from this show, is atrocious. He only had 8.7 fantasy points against Baltimore, but it was a nice showing for him. Because look, in his time at Seattle, I can tell you this much: he wasn't a pass-catching tight end. He was more of an inline guy, a blocker type. He actually caught Geno Smith's first ever touchdown pass back in that game against the Broncos. But that's basically all he was famous for at Seattle. He had some nice plays, but overall was mainly our blocking tight end. But now in Los Angeles, he's a man reborn in Jim Harbaugh's system, catching passes, beautiful seam routes in the red zone. And I just feel like, he's transformed into this player who's now much more mature at the position, no matter whether or not he is blocking or he's needed to catch a pass. That's the difference between what I think about in terms of development in a tight end. If you just are more of a physical tight end who's not necessarily going to help a team in terms of your catching prowess, then you're not necessarily going to develop into someone who can catch the pass. And Will Dissly was willing to do that. Because in this Chargers offense, yes, a lot of the time he is going to be blocking more often than not for this run game. But I do feel like he is someone who is more than capable of making an impact through the air. And we've seen it especially in the red zone, where he's really shined, both actually in Seattle and LA, if anything. And against the Falcons, this is an opponent that you can really go hog wild if you're Justin Herbert against. And so that's why Will Dissly is making a shocking appearance on this list. I would never have thought that I would be considering Will Dissly as a fantasy start any given week from a fantasy perspective and a standpoint, but this is how it is. I now view him as someone who is a competent pass-catching tight end for a Los Angeles Chargers team that could really diversify the pass game down the stretch here. And so, look for him to be a very sneaky weapon. So Will Dissly makes my list as my second player. And the third player, a guy who became familiar with, has been quiet the past couple of weeks, but against a, shall we say, bizarre defense to really figure out, he can have a nice day again. Cade Otton. This was someone who had a little bit of a breakout after, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down, and now that Mike Evans is back, we're expecting him to go back to being more of a blocking tight end, not necessarily catching as many passes. But I feel like in a potential trap game for the Bucs against the Panthers, how they're playing, Cade Otton can make a huge difference, because I feel like if the Bucs are going to make that run into the playoffs and get in and try and go up against the NFC's best, they're going to need to retain the ball. And that's what I love about Cade Otton. He's not necessarily the biggest route running threat, but he is someone who knows certain situations. He knows what he needs to do when he's asked to catch the football, whether it be in short yardage situations or whether it be, in the middle of the field exploiting zone coverage. He just is someone who's always going to be reliable, especially, if they can't get Mike Evans going like they want to in this offense. And he's a very nice balance what they already have in the run game as well. If they're doing really well from a running perspective, then that's where Cade Otton can also really shine as well. So look for them against the Panthers, potentially in a game that could be close in the stretch for him to really stand out in this one as well. I really think that this is a Bucs team that, all they have to do to really get into the postseason or just stay in the race is just play like they play all year. Play physical, play rough football, and it comes down to guys like Cade Otton really standing out and making a difference. So look for him to have another nice game yet again for this Bucs offense. And the last guy, this is a long shot, but he's always going to be someone who we have to talk about, kind of that generational gap here, kind of getting into that old guard, but still playing like one of the elite tight ends in all of football. Gonna be a very difficult day for him, though, going up against the Bills. But I still think that he might be one of the better football players on the field in this game. When you're one of the best on the field at any given game, chances are you have a strong shot at success, and that is George Kittle. I can't deny George Kittle. He is a fantastic football player, no matter what he's asked to do. Plays with so much passion, so much grit, even in tough situations. And this might be the toughest of his career. He's 5-6, going into the snowy environs of Buffalo to take on Buffalo, who's riding high with one of the best wins in the National Football League this season against the Chiefs. And you might not have your starting quarterback. Your defense has lost its star player. And right now, you have to really step up and carry this team. And it may not look pretty at times for the 49ers, but when and if you get George Kittle to football, chances are good things will happen. Because look, I know that at the end of the day, the 49ers probably aren't going to win this game. And it could get very ugly in terms of how these superstar players for the 49ers look, because of the fact that it could be Brandon Allen from the football. But let's be clear here. This is still a 49ers offense that is meant to operate no matter what. When adversity hits, it can operate at a high level. We've seen it with all of these players. And it's getting to that tipping point, right, where you have to have concern for certain elements of this offense should injuries start stockpiling again. But you still have McCaffrey, you still have Samuel, you still have Jennings, and you have George Kittle. And if you utilize all of them effectively, if you're Kyle Shanahan, then chances are you're still in football games. That last game against the Green Bay Packers was an anomaly, in my opinion, because I feel like, they were just in such a low place after that emotional loss to Seattle that they really couldn't muster a fight. And it could have been the same if Brock Purdy were there. So that's just how it is in the situation right now for the 49ers. But when I think about this team and I think about the pieces it can utilize to try and stay in this football game against Buffalo, George Kittle is going to be a huge aspect to how I think the 49ers will try and stay in this one. Because if he gets going, then I truly feel like they do have a chance to keep it a little bit closer. Maybe not, as close as, say, 10 to 15 points, but, in that region. Just because I just think that it's too much to say that these players will falter just because they don't have someone operating them. Brock Purdy isn't the end-all, be-all here. Let's be honest here. So that means that these skill position players still can shine no matter what. And so look for George Kittle in this role to really step up and be a vocal leader in this matchup and potentially try and make this game a little bit more respectable than a lot of people are thinking it will be should Brock Purdy not play. But looking at this list, I think it's pretty fair to say that this is a highly unexpected one at that. But let me know what you think about it in the comments, because I think all four of these guys, especially George Kittle, are elite wide tight ends in their own right, no matter how they play the position. And so I want to give each of them their flowers. But coming up to conclude today's show in the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, it is, as always, my weekly shadow report, the key wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define the fantasy football weekend. We'll be right back after this break to conclude today's show. Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And as always, we conclude today's Wednesday edition with our weekly shadow report, or actually with the final segment of the week, as we're taking a little bit of a Thanksgiving hiatus. And I wanted to get this one in because it's one of my favorite segments, one of your favorite segments as well. It is the key wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define the fantasy football weekend. And this time, it feels like these matchups are getting ever more clear. We're now getting into these divisional games yet again, where all of these guys are familiar with each other, and it's just come down to who wants it more, who is the better player on the day. And I feel like these are all fascinating studies of two elite players going up against each other, whether it's a divisional contest or just an important game for your team. So without further ado, let us jump into today's final segment, starting off with one of the more elite matchups of the weekend between two receivers on Thanksgiving. Two elite players on Thanksgiving, one of them being the receiver here, the other the cornerback, obviously. In Tyreek Hill going up against Jair Alexander. Now, I feel like this matchup, is going to be the true test of Jair Alexander's prowess as a quarterback against a guy who can take the top off you. I feel like, the Dolphins are going to be multi-dimensional in this one, but that does not mean that Tyreek Hill isn't going to have his moments here. And it's going to be a true test of how physical Jair Alexander is going to want to get with him, because if you get a little bit too physical, chances are it opens up a lot more avenues for this team either way, because you can shut down Tyreek Hill, but it opens up avenues for Waddle, it opens up avenues for Smith, it opens up underneath for guys like Devon Achane in the run game. And so it could be a conundrum, because Jair Alexander, let's face it, phenomenal at generating takeaways, phenomenal in man coverage, phenomenal at shutting you down. But this is a Dolphins offense that you can't necessarily go 1v1 against. You have to defend it in a whole collective effort. You can't necessarily slip up. And so that's why I feel like in this one, Tyreek Hill may have the slight advantage. He's playing with house money, and even though he hasn't been the best receiver since Tua's return, I feel like it's bubbling on the horizon here for him to have a big game with Tua yet again, to prove that they're still there and that they're still going to have a say in the outcome of the AFC playoff picture. And so the Packers defense better be ready, because it's not just Tyreek Hill, it's everyone else. And so even this matchup is a microcosm of the whole matchup. This Dolphins offense going up against this Packers defense. So even though this is an elite wide receiver cornerback matchup, and for fantasy purposes, one of the more exciting ones and more thrilling ones, I feel like, it's going to have to be mano a mano, but as a collective effort. So that's why this matchup is a amuse-bouche for the main event of that vaunted offense going up against that fearsome defense. But I still love this matchup either way. And the second one, this one certainly feels a little bit more modern, a little bit more, not necessarily pressing, but one of the more intriguing ones in terms of how both of these players play, because it's two very different styles of play here. It's physicality against finesse. It's, strength against speed. And that's what I really love about this matchup. It's two young guys as well. So not necessarily grizzled veterans, much like Tyreek Hill and Jair Alexander are, but two young guys in a game that certainly has deep underlying playoff implications, but maybe not necessarily that important to both teams, because they should feel good about where they stand. But Quentin Johnston going up against A.J. Terrell certainly feels like an intriguing matchup here, just because of the fact that Quentin Johnston is someone who I expect to be more of a vertical threat than someone who is a route runner and is a little bit more timely in terms of how he views receiving. And so that's going to be a huge challenge for A.J. Terrell, who I feel like would have preferred matching up against a guy like, say, Ladd McConkey or Joshua Palmer, because that's an even more interesting matchup there. But when these two line up against each other, if they do throughout this game, look for Quentin Johnston to really try and stretch him down the field. And I feel like, A.J. Terrell is more meant for short yardage situations where he can get more physical with you. But in these situations, he could really be the difference here. Because I feel like, if J.K. Dobbins, who we don't necessarily know about, doesn't play in this game, then the Chargers feel like they can take more deep shots down the field. And so that could lead to A.J. Terrell predicting, the kind of style that Quentin Johnston's going to come at him with. So that's why I feel like this one's a little more evenly matched now, just because of the fact that the Chargers feel like they're now going to open up downfield and pass the football a little bit more. But it remains to be seen, just because I'm not necessarily sure that Jim Harbaugh's going to want to completely give up the run game in this one, because that's his MO. And so that's what makes this one kind of a tactical chess match when they are matched up against each other. And I'm really excited for these two young studs to go at it in that intra-conference matchup, even though, the Falcons are a little bit sketchy right now, so to speak. Then the third matchup, I always try and pick one where it's fun, a more fun case study to see how this player matches up against a whole defense, because I feel like this guy could align anywhere and really make his impact felt for this Broncos team. And going up against a Browns secondary that, like I said, has not played like it can and like we know it can these past couple of weeks, but had a impressive performance against the Steelers and might be riding on a high here, can match up against him. So Courtland Sutton going up against the Browns secondary. I'm really intrigued to see how the Broncos move him along the line, because whether it be in the perimeter or the slot, he's really going to try and test these Browns corners and safeties down the field. And I feel like, for what it's worth, the Browns are definitely not as bad as what they've looked like on the field thus far. And they proved as much against the Steelers. Maybe it was just a passionate, performance against a divisional rival in a snow game, but it does show that they still have talent and potential on that side of the football. And so Courtland Sutton is someone who we've always wanted to see a lot more out of, and he's really stepped up into this role, being that wide receiver one for Bo Nix, and we kind of saw it last year with Russ. But I do feel like this matchup's going to be all about him showing his diversity as an athlete, his versatility in different situations, whether he's running routes, whether he's just going deep. How he's helping Bo Nix, most importantly, is going to be an interesting case study. And the reason why I named the entire Browns secondary rather than one player is because all of them are well equipped to shield what he does. Whether it's in the short to intermediate passing game, or when they're going deep. And so that's why I gotta respect the Browns secondary for what it is, even in a time of turmoil, just because all of them in their own right are going to find different ways to annoy Courtland Sutton in this matchup. And that's what you have to do sometimes when you're a struggling secondary. Just try and make it difficult for the star receiver. And even if the rest of your defense is struggling, as Tatum says, Browns are going to be an annoying opponent, and I completely agree with you. That's why this matchup is so intriguing to me, not just at a wide receiver corner man-to-man matchup, but how this Broncos offense and wide receivers especially match up against all of these talented Browns corners. It's going to be a matter of, if you can stop one guy, right, who's to say you can't go out and stop all the rest? And Courtland Sutton's going to be the guy that's going to be the focal point of this Browns defensive game plan here. Stopping him could be a key to at least slowing down a part of this vaunted Denver Broncos offense, or what is becoming of the vaunted Denver Broncos offense. So look for this to be a difficult matchup for Courtland Sutton and potentially the rest of the Broncos wide receivers here, because the Browns are going to want to play spoiler there in the AFC, and they definitely have the talent to do so. And now our final matchup of the day here. This one's a little bit of a bizarre one, actually, because I feel like this matchup has a clear winner here, but I am giving this defense a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, just because I don't necessarily think that they're the problem in terms of what Arizona needs to pinpoint down the stretch. But Justin Jefferson versus Sean Murphy Bunting, or if Garrett Williams is defending him most of the time, should be interesting matchups here. Even though, Justin Jefferson's a talented receiver, he can be shut down, much like he was against the Bears in that tough matchup against Jalen Johnson last week. So that's why I feel like in this matchup, Justin Jefferson has to be wary of how these Cardinals defenders are going to want to match up against him. I feel like he's going to also take a little bit more of a back seat than people think, just because, much like last week, it opens up a lot of avenues. If, someone's double teaming him and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson get going. But that being said, I do think that these Cardinals cornerbacks are gritty enough to really make this a challenge for him. So look for this matchup to really be an intriguing case study of wide receiver quarterback matchups. But let me know what you think about all these matchups in the comments below, because that will just about do it for the show and the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back Monday, same time as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network. Consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Happy and blessed Thanksgiving to you all. Enjoy it with your family and friends in advance. But other than that, I'm out for the week. Thank you all for tuning in.